Okay. I get it. All right. Oh no. Okay. All right. All right, ladies and gentlemen. My dog is flipping out right at 8 p.m. So I will be right back. I'm going to leave this with you. You guys can watch this trailer because she's flipping out. And she's apparently got to go to the restroom because I just flipped out on her earlier today about not going to the restroom when she needs to and going to the wrong place. So I'll be right back. Enjoy this trailer.
My name is George Khalil. I was drafted in the Army in 1941. I was just made 21. And they sent me a letter, and I got drafted. I took my examination the same day. The same day at 3 o'clock, they told me to be on that train going to San Antonio. And so I did.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Thank you for. Hope you enjoyed that trailer. So that is the trailer that we have out right now. We do have a trailer coming out, a new one that will be coming out very soon. So we're excited about that. Jared actually put this together. Actually did a sneak peek of the trailer earlier this week. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and let you know. If you were here at the very beginning of the show, there's probably going to be a little bit of disturbances. Madison is hyper. She was barking and letting me know that she had to go use the restroom, so I took her out to go and she peed. So apparently she had to use the restroom. Anyways, she's got her bowl, she's got stuff, so you may hear some knocking around with her bowl. That's her. It's not anybody trying to break in. So, anyways, hope you enjoyed that trailer. So we are planning. It's penciled in. It's tentative. We don't know for sure right now. We're working with the people who own this theater, but we are looking at possibly doing a premiere of the World War II documentary trailer. The show that you just, or the trailer that you just watched. We're looking to do the premiere on July 17th. So that's about a month and a half away. But I thought I'd throw that out at you just in case it is an actual date. So it looks like a good possibility. So we're very excited about that. So we do have, once we get that scheduled in stone, we'll release the new trailer. And I think you guys will, I think y'all really enjoy that new trailer that comes out. So tonight's going to be a pretty short episode. This is the ongoing series of America's Decline and Fall into Democracy, and people, when they hear that, they may think, what are you talking about? We are a democracy. Well, that in itself is part of the issue, part of the problem. I was actually at a local Rotary Club today in Houston, and that was one of the little things that I touched on when I got to introduce myself and discuss a little bit of what the Sons of History does. I touched, somebody asked, what is one thing that you should learn? It's like they say learn something new every day or whatever. What is something that we should learn? I said, we should learn that we're a republic and not a democracy. And I did a little slight tidbit breakdown of that, but really just scratched the surface. And that's the thing. That's the difference between just saying, oh, we're a democracy, and then explaining that we're actually a republic and how that works. And that's really the reason I've been really, I don't want to say harping on this, but discussing this. A few weeks ago, I started off the series with Socrates, Plato's Republic, how Socrates is discussing various forms of systems of government, various forms of government. He goes through the oligarchy, meritocracy or democracy, and then he gets into obviously the democracy. And so if you haven't watched that episode, I highly encourage you to. I give you a ton of information. What sucked about that one is that I did the entire episode and I apparently never clicked go live. So I was talking for an hour just to myself, and it was wonderful. What sucked is that when I did it the second time, I was running into some real internet issues, maybe running into it now, I don't know. It looks, what we'll see. But the second time I did it, I don't think that I did as well as I did the first time, which really irked me. Anyways, so I talked about Socrates discussing the issues with democracy and how that really does lead to chaos and then also leads to tyranny. And it's very interesting that what he lines out is exactly what happened in France with their French Revolution, Russia, China, Cuba, Spain, so in the 20th century. So Socrates 2,400 years ago was spot on. And you could say Socrates or Plato. Plato's the one writing it, but it's in the voice of Socrates. That's not that important. So the next episode that I talked on was the restraints on Congress, how our founders, the framers of the Constitution, put restraints on Congress, because the legislative branch was the branch that they were most afraid of would more or less usurp all the power. They would take all the power and do whatever it is that they wanted to do. And so with that, they also ensured that the executive branch had much more power than it did under the Articles of Confederation. And we talked about how exactly they ensured that they didn't have a pure democracy. It's only a very limited pure democracy, and that's only in one house, the House of Representatives. It's just the districts. And then we talked about how, all right, how do we restrain Congress? How do we restrain the legislative branch? Well, why don't we copy what Great Britain did and split them in two? We split, just like the House of Commons and House of Lords, we'll create House of Representatives and the Senate. Senate obviously coming from their study of the Roman Republic, which really played a key role in a lot of their decision making. So, creating districts, equality of votes. We talked about equality of votes in the Senate in order to combat the popular rule in the House. Now, the most populous states obviously equates the most representatives. That's only fair. But in order to protect the minority voice, in order to protect the states, and everybody else maybe in smaller states, the individual level, we created the Senate with 2 senators, each getting 1 vote. And so Rhode Island is in the Senate just as powerful as California. So you got, super small state to a gigantic state. So, and then we talked about, all right, so we're just going to move on, okay? We're talking about the presidential power and the strength that is on him. So if there ever was a theory to destroy or to debunk the claim that we are a democracy, it would be the executive. All you really have to do is look at the executive branch. I want to quickly give, and I'm probably going to do this each and every time, and I think it's just good, is give the definition of democracy and then give the definition of republic. A democracy is a government in which the supreme power is vested in the people, and exercised by them directly or indirectly through a system of representation, usually involving periodically held free elections. And when you look at that, a lot of times you're thinking, Dustin, that's what we are, to an extent, to a small extent. All right, but look at what a republic is. The definition of a republic is a government having a chief of state, i.e. the executive branch, the president, who is not a monarch, not a king or a queen. A government in which supreme power resides in a body of citizens, right? You have to be a citizen in order to have the power to vote. It's not just, hey, I live here, so let me have a say. They are entitled to vote and is exercised by elected officers and representatives responsible to them. So our senators, our representatives, they're responsible to us, but they govern according to law, i.e. the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the laws that are passed on really too often. And I've talked about that a lot in the past, is how we pass way too many laws and we are in a real bad situation. And these are warnings that the founding fathers, James Madison and Alexander Hamilton, they mentioned. They're like, you can't have super voluminous laws that are super long, or you're passing a bunch of them at the same time, because you can't keep up. You don't even know. You don't even know what laws are on the books. Not even the people who are passing the laws know what all the laws are on the books, and that's a shame. That's not a good thing. So the executive, I want to get on to the executive, the chief of state, as the definition describes it, right? As the republic is described, the chief of state. The executive has something called the veto power. We're going to get right into it. The veto power. This means that, and this is what I'm talking about, where if you ever needed if somebody's like, we're a democracy, then okay, then explain the veto. Explain how one person can shut down all of Congress. Explain that. So he has something called the veto power. And this means that even if the House and the Senate pass a bill, one person, the executive, can kill it, can kill that bill. And how does the president do that? Well, the president looks at the bill, doesn't like it, sends it back to Congress, right? And both houses have to repass that bill by 2/3 vote, by at least 2/3. Well, the thing is more often than not, you're not going to have a Senate and a House that are going to be in that much of an agreement on almost any particular thing, right? That is a very large a portion of Congress to have something passed. So there is extreme, it's not impossible, but there's extreme power with the veto. And so that is something that the founders understood. In order to have a republic, in order to ensure that Congress does not just run roughshod over the executive and over the people, well, we'll give the executive branch this veto power. There's also something called a pocket veto. You may have heard this before. You may know what it is. A pocket veto is, well, keep in mind that once a bill lands on the president's desk, he has 10 days to either sign it or send it back. Now, 10 days not including Sundays, right? So he has 10 days to sign it or send it back. If he does nothing with it and that 10 days elapses, it automatically becomes a bill. However, if the session, let's say that there are only 7 days left in the session for Congress, and they pass a bill and they send it to the president, and the president sort of, as they say, pocket veto, sort of sticks that bill in his pocket, well, that 7 days elapses, Congress goes out of session, and that bill is dead. It doesn't go to the next session, okay? So that bill is killed. So that's another form of the power that's actually even more powerful than just the regular veto, because it doesn't get to go back for like a 2/3 vote. Of course, they can go back and reinstitute, and repass it and send it back or whatever, but that's a lot of doing, right? So let's see. In order for okay, we got through with that. The House is the closest. We've talked about that. The House is the closest to a pure democracy, but in districts, Senate represents the state, right? So we talked about that in detail last episode, how it is the House of Representatives. Who do they represent? They don't represent the states. They represent their districts. In other words, they represent you and they represent me on a very intimate level. And we talked about how the founders said, look, in order for this son of a gun to pass, this Constitution, in order for it to pass, we got to make sure that the very basis of it starts in the hands of the people. So where do we do that? Well, obviously, the House of Commons, it would be the House of Representatives. So we give the power to the people, a direct vote to the people. Now, for 100 plus years, we had it to where the state legislatures were the ones voting in the senators, the two people to represent not the people, but the state. They were representing the interests of the state. So, and I want to touch on that and sort of some of the reasons why that they wanted to make sure that the interests of the state was above, that was in the Senate and not in the House of Representatives. There was a distinction there. If you have ever gone to any other state outside of your own, chances are you've noticed things are different. There's just a different feel, a different vibe. Yes, it's America, but there are different cultures. They're different. And I don't want to say cultures, but there's just a different way of life. Like in Texas, it's different than in New York. Okay? I've been to New York a number of times. It's very different. Even in Florida, those are two, as of right now, those are two red states, right? But they're still very, very different in just the way that they live their lives, their traditions, different things like that. Yeah, there's a lot that sort of brings us all together as a nation, sort of like a lot of us have the same religion. A lot of us have like 50-50 almost to an extent of political beliefs. So there's a lot that holds us together, but still those 50 states are 50 republics, and they sort of feel a bit like 50 countries. And the founders understood that as we expand, as different as Massachusetts is to Georgia, it's going to continue to be that way as we expand westward. So as we divide this continent up into different states, we have to keep in mind that people who go into these states are going to be of a different mindset a lot of times. So you have to keep that in mind. So here are some of the things that's why the Senate represents the states. And it's not just landscape like a Hawaii and versus an Arizona. Yeah, two very different, but extremely different ways of life, views and everything. Never been to Hawaii. I've always wanted to go. So individual state legislatures and governors, so focus on the diversity, right? There was a focus on diversity way before the word diversity got overused in modern times. So you have, let me do a quick breakdown here. On the federal level, you have the House of Representatives, you have the Senate, and then you have the executive branch. Well, in the states, you have the same thing. You have the representatives, the state reps, the state senators, and the governor, right? So you've got Congress, you've got the executive, and of course you have the judicial branch. You've got 50 Supreme Courts, and then you have the highest court in the land, the United States Supreme Court. But you have republics, and it all, goes up to the federal level. So they kept that in mind. It's like there is going to be a lot of diversity in this country. There are going to be different desires, different demands. And a lot of that is not going to be based on, like I said, landscape, although some of that does have a lot to do with it. But it's going to be, they're going to vary according to their laws and regulations. You think of how, from my perspective, how harsh the regulations are in California, right? Business regulations over there are really driving businesses out of business or out of the state. And so, from my perspective, that's not a good thing. In Texas, it's much more lenient. In fact, we don't have a state tax. Florida is another state that doesn't have a state tax, but there's a lot of states that do have a state tax, right? So there are different laws, there are different regulations. Some are more harsh than others. And another thing is like GDP. How is your economy? What is your economy based on? And that was something very important, and obviously the population. What's the size of the population? Massive diversity. Diversity, just for diversity's sake, is like you're going to have a ton of people, right? And some states are going to have more than others. And this is mentioned in conversation. This is mentioned in conversation during the Constitutional Convention. Madison is writing the notes on this, and he mentions John Rutledge and Pierce Butler. These are two delegates from South Carolina, and this is what they were talking about. He said, Mr. John Rutledge proposed that the proportion of suffrage in the first state, or in the first branch, should be according to the quotas of contribution. The justice of this rule, he said, could not be contested. Mr. Pierce Butler urged the same idea, adding that money was power and that the states ought to have weight in the government in proportion to their wealth. Now, if you think about it, this is not technically how representation works in Congress, but it does. And I'll explain. The senators understand that their constituency is the state. It is not the individual. It is the economics of the situation. It is the laws and regulations. So they are representing whatever is best for their state. If they will get a hand up, then obviously they're going to go for it. If it's not going to be something that the state would really want, then they're not going to go for it. So it is about, to an extent, money is power. It is about, okay, what do we do to make our GDP higher? What is it that we do to make our economy run better? And what are some things that we can do to institute those things, to make them, to make maybe people want to come to this state, or certain industries or certain business owners. What do we have to do in order to make those things happen? And we don't want to make things more difficult. Although for some politicians it seems like they want to make things more difficult, and you sort of see that in some of the bluer states where you see this mass exodus. And that's not in all blue states, but there are some, i.e. New York and California. They've made it so, and Washington. There are a lot of people leaving Washington as well. But then again, there's a lot of chaos and turmoil going on over there, which is interesting to say in a country where we're all supposed to be, free and whatnot. So here's another one that I wanted to mention that David Brearley of New Jersey said during the Constitutional Convention. And he said this: when the proposition, and this is Madison writing on about what he was referencing. He says, when the proposition for destroying the equality of votes came forward, he was astonished. He was alarmed. Is it fair then, it will be asked, that Georgia should have an equal vote with Virginia? He would not say it was. What remedy then? One only, that a map of the U.S. be spread out, that all the existing boundaries be erased, and that a new partition of the whole be made into equal parts. So what David Brearley was saying is and this was during their discussion of the House of Representatives and the Senate and trying to come up with this compromise between the two, was if we don't have some type of compromise, because if the large states get to have all the power, that's not going to be good. But if the small states get to have an equal amount of power across the board, the big states are going to say, screw that, we're not going to do this. We'll just start our own country. So he was saying if you don't come up with some type of compromise, if you don't protect, like we talked about in the last episode, if you don't protect the minority voice, and if you don't understand the ideas of diversity throughout a vast empire, if you will, we can call America that, this vast continent, then you might as well just get rid of all the boundaries. Might as well just get rid of, the states and just call it America and just call it one big country. That's the only other way to do it. And therefore, you would wind up more or less with a pure democracy, and you'd have absolute chaos. So this is why we have the Electoral College. Okay, so that is what I'm going to be talking about next week. I'm going to go into detail about that. It is a check on the people and the states. Okay, the Electoral College. Okay, and it also ensures that the president does, or the candidates do and go where they should when trying to get into office. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is it for the show. Keep in mind, if you ever in a conversation or a bit of a debate about, okay, what do you mean that we're a republic and not a democracy? Just hit them with the veto power of the president. How in the world, if we're a democracy and majority rule either through the individuals or through the representatives, how in the world would it be that one person could shut down an entire bill, could shut down Congress? That's not a democracy. That's a republic, all right? And then also you can hit them with, we split the houses. That is a major thing that is of utmost importance. And anybody who screws around and starts saying, oh, we need to get rid of the Senate or we need to get rid of the Electoral College, I'm going to hit you in the face with facts next week regarding the Electoral College. Ladies and gentlemen, that is it for tonight's show. I hope you enjoyed the conversation.